system of Islam, and we are just literally, we are just touching very small aspect of the economic system during the time of Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu. So at least we taste it. We understand that how Islam addresses that comprehensive way of life, inclusive of the economic system that Allah Azza wa Jal has given to us through Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. As we talked about last week, that how in the time of Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, two very major crises that happened. That one was the Amul Ramada, the year of ashes, and the plague or the ta'un that happened in the time of Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu. And it was disastrous. Literally tens of thousands of people were killed because of those two crises. But even though there were no airplanes, there were no trains, there was no cars, any of those motor vehicles, but Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu during that time was able to take care of those crises. And we have to understand that how and why he was able to do that, while on contrary to that, while we are a huge number of the ummah that exists today, and resources wise we have abundance of resources, but we see all sorts of economic crises, one after another, are happening to the ummah, while they are the one who are at the locations from the perspective of resources. We are the one, Muslim ummah is the one who have the most resources, most critical resources of the world in their lands. And even then, what we find is ummah is under the debts of World Bank, IMF, and WTO is applying different sorts of tariffs over the Muslim lands. And we find that people think that we are not capable of even taking care of bread and butter of the people. This is ridiculous. This is why it's important for us to go back and study our deen from the angle of, okay, how does Islam take care of it? How did Islam take care of it? 13, 14 centuries, Muslims continue to take care of these things. And now today, we feel like as if that we have no control over our destiny when it comes to economic means and how to take care of that. So when we start talking about Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu's life, so I pointed out that because of our ignorance about, as an ummah in general nowadays, the time we are living in, our ignorance regarding our systems of life that Allah Azza wa Jal revealed, especially economic system of Islam that was from Allah Azza wa Jal and that was implemented as well. If we even ask ourselves, many a times we come to the conclusion, we don't realize that how does Islamic system, economic system works. Really, most of the time we think of it, it's only zakah. Or the max we can think of it, riba is haram. Okay, what else? Now, this is where the meat of the talk is about. So we talked about two of the aspects last week, which is zakah and jizya. Zakah, yes, it is an important aspect of it. It's an obligation, it's a pillar of Islam. One of the pillars of Islam is zakah. And it does take care of, to a certain extent, some of the people which are living under Islam. But that's for the Muslims, first of all, taken from the Muslims, distributed among the Muslims. And it's only for those 8 specific categories that Allah Azza wa Jal has defined in the Quran. And it's important for us to also understand, as I mentioned that last week as well, zakah cannot be given to anybody but those 8 categories Allah Azza wa Jal has defined. We cannot use the money from the zakah for opening hospitals or madaris or giving the salaries of whosoever is working in there, unless those people come under those 8 categories. That's a different story. Because if they are from the masakin wa fuqara, or they are the one who are under the debt, or the one who are, you're freeing the slaves, and these kind of things that they come under, that's a different story. But we cannot use that per se to say this is your salary. No, it cannot be. Unless you're talking about amilin zakah. Amilin zakah is a specific category. The one who are working to collect the zakah. So that was about the zakah. And then we talked about jizya. It's important for us to understand jizya also, because in general, the media has created a strange buzz against the word jizya. Oh, Muslims were collecting jizya from the non-Muslims when Islam was implemented. Well, Let's go back and check. And we talked about that as well. Jizya is such a small amount of tax that was taken from only the male, mature, the one who's capable per head. And it was not taken from children, not taken from the women, not taken from elderly, or not taken from anybody who is not capable. Those people, the ones who were not capable, as a matter of fact, they were given the stipends from the Baytul Mal, from the treasury of Islamic State at that time. And that's what Islam teaches us. And not only that, they were on top of it. They were also excused from, there's no zakah on them. It's only for the Muslim. It's an act of ibadah. So there's no zakah on them. There is no ushr, which is the zakah on the produce. And on top of it, they are not the one who are obliged to even fight in the army or something. So on top, Muslims were obliged to protect them as well. This is why what we see is the people who were living under Islam, in a very short period of time, there's a very big number who entered into folds of Islam by their own will. Like Rahafuddin, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that there is no compulsion, so there is no force for the people to enter into folds of Islam, right? So that was about the jizya, and we talked about jizya also, that it was according to the people's capability from the perspective of somebody is very wealthy. So in Syria, it was 4 dinar per year, while the middle class was 2 dinar and the lower class was 1 dinar per year, which is like 1 dinar is about $250 per year. So that was about it. And of course, the people who were not able, they were not the one who were forced to do that. So today we'll talk about another aspect of the revenue that comes into the treasury of the Islamic treasury, or the Baytul Mal, which is called kharaj. And kharaj is an important aspect that people have been blindsided about. As the hadith from the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, once a land is a kharaji land, it's always a kharaji land. What does it mean by kharaji land, first of all? Kharaji land means a land which is open by some force, meaning the armies entered there, and that's a subject of its own. What does it mean by army entering into land? There was more for the removing those oppressive rulers, and then after that, people had their own will, and now whether Muslim or non-Muslim who was living there, they later on, for example, a Muslim buys those land or something, or start working on the specific land, they had to pay kharaj on the land. And the kharaj was calculated by the Amir of that time, Amir al-Mu'mineen, or the Khalifa of that time. And in the time of Umar bin Khattab, there was a lot of strides were made in the field of the collection of the kharaj. Why? Because kharaj, in the time of Umar bin Khattab, what we see is the land of the Muslim Ummah expanded very rapidly. Especially to talk about Iraq, Bilad al-Sham, and Egypt. These were huge pieces of lands we are talking about. And as I mentioned before also, Bilad al-Sham means today's. We're talking about Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and Palestine. All together is Bilad al-Sham. And then Iraq. Iraq itself is bigger than all this. And then Egypt. These are huge, huge pieces of lands. And they're very fertile lands to the point, especially in Iraq and today's Syria even, the Bilad al-Sham, one of the most fertile lands of the world. And even Misr, or Egypt, as we talked about when we were talking about Amur Ramada, the year of ashes, the drought that happened during the era of Umar bin Khattab, Egypt was one of the lands that provided a lot of goods, of food, that was transferred from Egypt to the Hijaz at that time. And the drought situation was taken care of. Amr bin al-As radiallahu anh was the governor, and he sent thousands of loaded camels and then some ships as well. We talked about that already now. So today talking about the kharaj, the thing about the kharaj to understand is Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anh, when these lands were opened up, he did not want to distribute the lands among the soldiers only. Because in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the 1/5 went to Allah and His Messenger and the masakin and the fuqara, the needy ones, and the rest of the 4/5 was given to the soldiers, the one who opened the land. Now the problem was, this is a huge pieces of lands that we were talking about, and Umar bin Khattab wanted to figure out what to do now. On the other hand, Bilal Habashi radiallahu anh, Bilal ibn Rabah, and Zubair ibn al-Awwam, these are two great Sahaba of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, by the way. We are not talking about somebody unknown who was fighting with Umar. How can you, they were asking for, we opened the land, we won the land for ourselves now. This is our land now. And Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anh, he opposed that, but he did not oppose as, okay, from now on, it's the way of Umar, nobody else can question that. Rather, he gathered the Sahaba, he gathered the Ansar and the Muhajirun, the one he used to do the Shura with. He gathered them and he wanted to ask them, what should we do now? Because the problem was, this is a huge pieces of land. How can we give it to them? Because what Allah Azza wa Jalla says is, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وما أفاء الله على رسوله منهم فما أوجفتم عليه من خيل ولا ركاب ولكن الله يسلط رسوله على من يشاء والله على كل شيء قدير. And what Allah gave as booty of fay to His Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, from them for which you made no expedition with either cavalry or camelry. So this is a distinction between the wealth comes from the fay and the wealth which is referred as the ghanima. Fay is that you did not send any cavalry. You opened the land because of the peace treaty, or the people became Muslim and they came into the fold of Islam without any kind of a fight. So there is no, that wealth is referred as the fay. Now, and then, that goes on, but Allah gives power to His Messenger over whomsoever He wishes, and Allah is able to do all things. Now, here, this verse was specifically referred to the Banu Nadir. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said that about Banu Nadir this. Now, after that, the continuation of this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ما أفاء الله على رسوله من أهل القرى فلله وللرسول ولذي القربى واليتامى والمساكين وابن السبيل كي لا يكون دولة بين أغنياء منكم. This is a very important part of the verse. That it says كي لا يكون دولة بين الأغنياء منكم. That it says that what Allah gave you as a fay to His Messenger from the people of the township, it is for Allah and His Messenger, the kindred, the orphans, the masakin, and the wayfarer, in order that it may not become a fortune used by the rich among you. Meaning, the wealth does not stay just among few. So rich, because if that wealth would have been distributed, the amount piece of land, then very few people are the one who are getting this. And the people who will come afterwards, they will not receive it. And that could have caused the maldistribution of the wealth. And Umar, when he consulted with the Sahaba Ridwanullah alayhim, they used this as the evidence, and they continue on, and they said, Umar was right about this, that this land should not be distributed, rather it should be left to the farmers, the ones who were already working on them, and that becomes their land. And they are the ones who start working, and Umar started taking the kharaj from that. Now that kharaj, which is the produce of the asal. Asal is the land and the produce coming out of it. Now that produce was taken into the Baytul Mal, and that is called the public property of the Ummah. Now this public property is for all the Ummah, the one that existed at that time, or the one who would come later on, and they will continue to benefit from that. And this is another aspect of the knowledge regarding the economic system and the revenue in the economy of the Muslims needs to be learned, which is the property is of three different types. One is called public property, one is state property, and one is called private property. Okay? And that public property, whether it's that kind of a wealth, whether it's the oil wells that exist. Because the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that says, Al-Muslimu, one hadith says, الناس شركاء في ثلاثة الكلاء والماء والنار. That the people or the Muslims are partners in three things. Al-Kala, the grazing land. Nar is, translation is fire, but it's talking about, because other hadith talks about hatab as well. Hatab is the wood, which is the fuel. All sorts of fuels are public property. And the water. All this is public property. When we say public property, it means that the state governs it. Any benefit that comes out of it is distributed among the ummah. Imagine today the wealth that is generated by oil wells in the Muslim land that belong to all the Muslims. What will be the situation of the Muslim ummah? We will be a completely different kind of a world we are living in. Same way, imagine that most of the Muslim lands that we are talking about, these kind of huge pieces of lands, Iraq, Bilad al-Sham, Egypt, Pakistan, India, whichever these lands we're talking about, these are called Kharaji lands. Kharaji land means today the feudalistic system that exists today in the Muslim lands especially, where those feudal lords, they have thousands and thousands of acres of lands, and then they lease those lands to the farmers, and those farmers are under the debt throughout their lives. And they literally become the slaves of those, whether those are called the Chaudhries, whether they are called the Waderas, whether they are called whatsoever name that they have, or the head of the tribe. Now, if that belongs to the people, whoever works on it, or somebody has to employ them. Employee is different than leasing the land. So, and then from that piece of land, there is a kharaj coming into the revenue of the state. That creates a huge revenue for the state. So it's not that whenever we think of Islam, think of the deen, it works on the charity. This is not how the state worked in the past, and inshallah this is not the way it will be working. It's not a charity state. It's not something that you think of it always, there will be boxes outside the masajid to run the state. No, it's a comprehensive state that ran for 13 centuries. So now, Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anh, he made sure that these lands are kharaji land in a manner that land stays with those people who are farmers over there, and that actually had a very positive impact. But before I talk about the positive impact, Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anh, he sent different Sahaba ridwanullah alayhim that include Hudayfa bin Yaman and Uthman bin Hunayf to go and measure the land, understand the produce, and based on that the kharaj was calculated that was taken from the people over there. And one of the hadith that talks about when they were measuring the land of Sawad, the amount of wealth that was taken from there was 36 million dirham. 36 million dirham from Al-Sawad land. And similarly, and that's from the Sawad, from the Iraq. And the similar things were done in Egypt as well. And Egypt, the only difference was over there that the one who was the governor over there was Amr bin al-As. And Amr bin al-As, radiallahu anh, he is the one who measured the kharaj from that land, and that was sent back to Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anh. And from there, of course, it was distributed among the people as there was need and as the state is supposed to run the affairs of it. One of the reasons that Umar said this was, he said, if we have that big, huge pieces of lands, these pieces of lands had to be manned to protect them. There has to be guards to protect the frontiers. Otherwise, Byzantines and which is the Byzantine Empire and the Persian Empire that was still there, from whom these lands were taken from, they will attack back and take it back. Now, the inhabitants of these lands, they were still non-Muslims, majority of them. But when they saw the justice that Islam was providing, and the way it was collecting the tax, it was way less than the Persians and the Romans were taken from them. And they were given the land to work on them, and whatever they produced, that's theirs, except the small tax that they had to pay, which is for the Muslims and non-Muslims. So when they saw that, in a very short period of time, we find that many of the people, by their own will, they enter into folds of Islam. See, and Islam does not force anybody to become a Muslim. If they had to force, I think 13 centuries was enough for the people of Iraq and the Sham and the Egypt to enter into fold of Islam, but it did not happen. We find that there are still people who are for centuries, whether it's Egypt, you find Coptic Christians over there, whether it's Syria, Lebanon, you find huge population of Maronite Christians. In Syria also you find Ashuris and different kinds of Christians over there. And so is Palestine, and so on and so forth. And if you take Indian subcontinent, Muslims ruled for about 800 years. It's still, if you calculate the population of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh all together, majority is not Muslim. That itself is enough of facts for the people to understand that the Muslims never forced the people to become Muslim. It is always by their own will. Okay, so that's a huge revenue that Muslims were collecting in the time of Umar bin Khattab. He started that, and afterwards Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anh also started another thing which is called al-ushur. Ushur is different than ushur. Ushur is a zakah on the produce that comes out, and people have to pay the ushur on the land. Al-ushur is, which is called when you are doing trade, and Muslims were doing the trade, and when they were going outside the Muslim lands at that time, there were customs that they were applying on them. The amount of taxes, like today we call customs or tariffs. So Umar, he did something which is, whatever they were charging, Umar charged the same thing, which is bil mithal, something which is the rule that is applied, that whatever they apply, you do the very same way. It was not more, it was not oppressive or anything, because they are the one who were doing it, and Muslims were doing the very same thing to them. So that became another means of revenue for the state. Inshallah, next week we will talk about how Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anh, he started a method which is called diwan, how to keep the records of all those things, which is an administrative issue. And then we'll talk about the judiciary as well in the next week, which is actually, we will meet after Dhuhr on this coming Saturday as well, inshallah. Whether it's Ramadan or not Ramadan, we'll meet after Dhuhr and we'll continue from there, inshallah. Okay? So we'll stop here. If there's any questions about the subject covered, inshallah, I'll try to answer them. Otherwise, we'll stop here. Jazakumullah khair. Yes.
So in the Kharaji land,
Yeah.
there is like, let's just say, some existing governor of political Islam.
Yeah.
So now that comes under the Kharaji land.
You're saying that, see, the Kharaji land is if Muslim armies entered into the land, cavalry and all those things, and they open the land, that land will be called Kharaji. If the people become Muslim without any of the armies entered, like Indonesia, Malaysia, they are not referred as Kharaji lands. They are called Ushri lands. So because they became Muslims before that, so they are not. And Hijaz, the Jaziratul Arab, is considered as exception to the case. Makkah, Medina, and all those places, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not apply the kharaj on them. Hence, there is no kharaj on that. Besides that, anybody who becomes Muslim of their own, then there is no land tax on that. But they still have to pay ushur, which is the tax on the produce, which is not tax, it's zakah on the produce, if it passes certain nisab or the threshold. Does that make sense? So the question that you're asking is, if people became Muslim, then there is no, it's not a kharaji land of their own. But if